I think we had a great time doing it. I think, like as with everything, there's highs, there's lows, but there's far more highs than lows.
In our last episode, we took our boat for a survey, and it felt bittersweet to cruise Stay Cool one last time before we delivered her to new owners. We enjoyed time with family before flying home to Vancouver Island on Canada's west coast. I'm Rachel, and this is Malcolm, and we did the Great Loop on our mainship 390 called Stay Cool. And I just want to say that I'm really proud of us for completing the Great Loop, something we've been thinking about doing for a long time. And we worked really well as a team, so I'm proud that we were able to do it. But the trip itself wasn't really the crossing the finish line. It was really the sum of all the little journeys we did to get to that point.
I agree entirely.
Yeah.
And I also, probably now I should do a shout out to Rachel for all the work she's done in putting these videos together. Yeah. She started right at day one and worked, I don't know how many hours. Now, this isn't just, I'm not tooting her horn, but how many hours she put in editing while we were sitting on the hook or at a dock, and I think you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was sort of a creative outlet for me. It was a huge learning curve. I'd never done anything like this before, but it's something I enjoy doing, and I'm glad that a lot of you have commented that you enjoyed as well, because it sort of keeps me going. And we were doing it mostly for our friends and family, but I think it's turned into a bit of a community of people who enjoy this adventure. So hopefully it's something that will continue.
And I think it's part of your adventure that you've been able to relive it through looking at these videos and preparing them for all of you out there. Mm-hmm. You're able to relive, the experiences. And I've caught her on occasion looking at her own videos multiple times, just saying, "Oh, look at that! I remember when we did this. Did you remember those dolphins?"
Yeah.
So I think it's certainly helped us relive some of the experiences, and hopefully it's helped you come along with us. Mm-hmm. Because the community out there, and there's many of you that have been with us from day one, have really added to this experience for us, and hopefully it's added something to you as well.
Here's a brief overview of our Great Loop statistics. We traveled in 3 countries, including 2 Canadian provinces, 18 U.S. states, and the Abacos Islands in the Bahamas. We cruised a total of 6,228 miles, which is equivalent to 5,412 nautical miles or 10,023 kilometers. We added 830 total engine hours and filled our diesel tanks with a total of 1,800 U.S. gallons. And we only used 14 hours on our generator, and we estimate approximately 800 kilowatt hours of solar consumed. Overall, I think we had a fantastic time on the loop. We did it in 1 year, and it was a really great way to immerse ourselves in the boating culture and to live on our boat and really enjoy the entire journey all at once.
I agree. I thoroughly enjoyed our time on the loop. I thought it was everything that I expected and more. And it was something that I'd never, experienced anywhere else. Mm-hmm. We've traveled all over the world, and yet this is right, in a sense, on our doorstep. And it was a great experience for that year.
Very much so. We come from a background of boating. We've boated a few different types of boats, smaller boats, and we've rented boats as well in Australia and in the North Channel in preparation for sort of getting used to this sort of trip. And that really helped us in terms of feeling comfortable operating a boat and taking it on an adventure of this size.
It gave us, I think, an opportunity to enjoy the trip versus learning how to boat while doing the loop. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a big difference for us, is that we really could enjoy all the sights and scenery coming along without worrying about how do you do this on the boat or how do you do that. So for us, it's a great experience with having that experience. And something that I think just added to the ability for us to enjoy it as we continue down that path.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people ask what we liked best about the loop, and that's a really hard question to answer because there's so many wonderful things and so many varied things. So I think one of the things that I really liked was the great variety of waterways and scenery along the way. Anything from, unspoiled natural landscapes and fresh water up in Canada, which we're a little biased, I think. But we really like that area. And then, of course, going down the rivers, it's a very unique experience boating with the barges. Then you get sort of partway down, you get into some more natural environments like in the Kentucky Lakes area and the beautiful fall colors. And then, of course, down in Florida, there's all the beaches. They're really amazing areas down there.
It's fantastic.
But it's more populated, so it's a different sort of place to be. And then, boating across the Gulf of Mexico in the middle of the night, that was very unique. And I guess the Bahamas was a really sort of exotic, really interesting place to take our own boat.
It really was. I mean, I thought Florida was exotic enough, but then you cross over and all of a sudden you're in, palm trees, coconuts, and white sandy beaches everywhere. Yeah. All of those things, traveling through the windy Mississippi, Ohio, Cumberland, seeing the pelicans that I never expected to see when we were down in the mid-states, was all just added to the trip itself, where you think, oh, I'm going to get in a boat and I'm going to travel the waters. It's all those things that surround the waters that really added to the value.
And the East Coast too has some really neat areas, the salt marshes and just the really nice waterways. It was Chesapeake Bay. All of those areas are really amazing. And I think, some of the highlights are these little towns that you stop in along the way. Mm-hmm. They're very quaint little towns with little areas to walk around. That's really fun, and meeting the locals. And then I think, one of the best parts of the loop, though, is actually meeting the people on the loop, the other loopers. You make some new lifelong friends, and you have people from all walks of life. Some people who have very large, luxurious boats, and other people with smaller boats. But we all have the same thing in common, and that's boating.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And we never would have met a lot of the people otherwise. And yet, there are people that have shared values, they have shared experiences, and anytime you get together afterwards, you can always break into that loop conversation on, do you remember when? Yep. Or what about when this happened? Or what are you doing now with boating? Mm-hmm. It's a really great sense of community. Yep. And one where the camaraderie is great. And, anybody who's out there is going to help you, and that's how we felt as we went along. You're always looking out for one another. It continues when you're off the boat. And that's one of the things I really do like about the loop itself, and also, after looping. Mm-hmm.
Some of the challenges we faced along the loop were primarily, I would say, weather related.
I think so. I think primarily.
Yeah.
It wasn't, we didn't have really mechanical challenges other than that one little spot in the Bahamas. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it was a challenge. It was more of you had to work around it.
Yeah, well, the Mother Nature isn't going to change her plan because we're there.
So from a looping perspective, I actually enjoyed that, because you're kind of in charge of your own domain. Mm-hmm. It's up to you. You've got to make sure you watch that weather, mm-hmm. watch everything, and when you do, it empowers you, because you can actually plan a trip and a voyage or an anchorage or a marina. And you know what? You watch that. I have a very comfortable night's sleep because I actually did all the pre-work to make sure that, that anchorage is going to be protected in the wind, or we went to a marina because there was tornado warnings, and we're just fine. So it gave you a lot of sense of accomplishment, I think, in planning those things out and taking all those variables into account.
We're going to talk a little bit about the cost of looping in our next episode, where we're giving some top tips. So I'm not going to repeat ourselves here, but mm-hmm. That has a huge range. That you can spend a little bit on the loop, you can spend a lot on the loop. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Mm-hmm. And getting back to the weather, one of the things that we found on our loop anyway, and I think a lot of people think when you're heading south, you're just going to kind of wear shorts and t-shirt most of the time. But we found on the loop that we had actually probably more cool days than warm days.
Yeah, I think on our loop, the need for puffy coats can't be understated, and gloves. Yeah. Occasionally a hat. We call them toques, beanies. But I think occasionally, you really needed to take note of what the temperature was going to be at night, because you get a little frost on the boat, which we had on a few occasions.
We liked using our diesel heater.
Our diesel heater, in fact, I think we mentioned before, the first time we used our diesel heater was actually when we were close to Demopolis.
In the rivers.
In the rivers. Yeah. So for us, I don't dislike being cool. You want to stay cool, but you don't want to stay cold. So one of the things that as we went down, it was nice to have that heater. And for us, I think wearing those layers, the warm clothes, it really helped us. It made it more enjoyable than if you're sitting there shivering away, waiting for the sun to show.
On our loop, we chose to do some anchoring some of the time, but we also decided to go to some marinas, and that was primarily maybe sometimes because of weather, but also to go and see some sights. Yeah. So a bit of both, and obviously marinas cost money, so something that you're aware of when you stay for several days in one place. But certainly in the Bahamas, when we were waiting for the right weather window to come back, there were some times when we didn't really want to be spending that kind of money on a marina, but we didn't really have any choice.
No.
So sometimes it's decided for you.
Yeah.
But in our case, we did okay. I think we stayed in more marinas than we had planned, but I was comfortable with our decision.
Yeah, I think marinas are they're great to have there. They're a great resource. If you need to get in, get some parts, get something done. For us, we were fortunate. We didn't really have situations where we needed to get to a marina. We chose to be in marinas, and that you're right. Maybe the Bahamas was a little different in the sense we didn't have much choice because the weather was just basically pinning us in there. I really enjoyed the anchoring. I thought there was times when we were anchoring in the North Channel where it was so quiet and peaceful. There was times when even when the storms or the wind was blowing, you felt secure. Marinas are necessary. They help you. There's a little difference in maneuvering around those marinas, which we found in some cases. Depends what your tolerance is. Ours was, let's try and anchor out. And if we couldn't, well, we'll go to the marinas. It wasn't something we avoided.
So for us, traveling as Canadians through the United States and the Bahamas, we didn't really have any issues in terms of safety.
No.
And we didn't experience any piracy. We had some people ask us about that, and we never really even thought that was an option going to the Bahamas. And I don't think anybody really needs to worry about that.
No.
Personally, I don't think we've really felt unsafe anywhere. Maybe if you're in a big city, certain places, you should avoid certain areas. But I think if you do your research ahead of time,
Yeah.
And we didn't feel unsafe at any time. Obviously, with the boat, we took precautions for safety in terms of, if we have to abandon ship, we had things ready to go. Our dinghy would be our escape vessel if we had to do that.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, we would plan ahead, and we didn't have any issues with safety.
No.
Yeah.
A lot of that is planning. It's doing your research. It's just like traveling anywhere. On our loop, we basically took the standard precautions you take when you're going to travel anywhere. Europe, US, Canada. I think on our loop specifically, the only time I felt that the boat was perhaps at risk was, of all places, at the Hudson. I could still see New York. And that was when we had the wind against waves. And that was a bit scary.
That was a little unexpected, I think, from our perspective. But looking back on it now, we maybe should have realized that because the tide was 5 feet.
Oh, I should have absolutely realized that the tide against wind is... I was under the misapprehension that the Hudson's just a river. It's not a big deal. But the reality is it is a big deal when you get a northeaster. So,
yeah.
But lesson learned.
Well,
we didn't do that again.
Yeah, we didn't do it again. That's true. On our loop, we chose to go home twice during the loop, and that I think was a good thing for us. A lot of people might go home at Christmas. We chose to go home. It was the Canadian Thanksgiving in October, and then again in April the next year.
Yeah.
And for us, it was good to take a break from the loop, I think, and it makes us appreciate the loop that much more.
It does, yeah. And for us, life doesn't stop when you go on the loop. Things happen. That's what dictated one of our trips home. The first of the 2 trips that we took, we came back for 3 weeks, and I think we can agree that it's probably a little long. You start missing the boat. You start thinking, we want to get going again. But once the 3 weeks were done, we were back on the boat, and off we went.
And that's true, actually, when we finished our loop, I think for the first, I'm going to say month, it was quite hard to get used to just being on land and not actually planning to go anywhere or... I think we still checked the weather and wind every day for a while just because we were in such a habit of doing that. And, you're checking on Nebo, where are the boats that and where's everybody doing? But, you don't really need to. You're off on land doing your own thing.
And you open the blinds every morning and think the scenery is going to change, and it doesn't.
It's the same all the time.
It's the same tree. It does take an adjustment.
So in summary, I would say we had an excellent experience on our loop. One thing that we've noticed is that every single looping boat has their own unique experience. So there isn't one loop that's the same. So it's very unique to you and your own boat. And our experience was a good one, I would say.
It was terrific.
We worked well as a team.
Yeah.
I think it was pretty much what we expected, although you don't really know till you get out there.
I think overall the feeling and the accomplishment was exactly what I expected it to be. I think the details of what we experienced and when, I had no idea.
No, some of it you work out on the fly.
Right. So, I mean... Did I know, the Grand Haven was going to be as it was, and Muskegon was as it was, and St. Louis looked like it did?
Clearwater.
No, probably not. So it was great in the sense that I didn't have those preconceived ideas.
And it was nice to have those sort of little surprises sometimes along the way. Be spontaneous.
Yeah, every time you ran around a corner, it was always different. And to me, that typifies the whole loop thing for me. I think we had a great time doing it. I think, like as with everything, there's highs, there's lows, but there's far more highs than lows. And if you're adventurous like we are, I think I think it's a great thing to do.
Yeah.
Would we do it again?
Absolutely. Not do it twice, but if we had to go back and decide if we were going to do it, we would do it.
We would.
We would recommend it to anybody
We
as well
would.
who was interested in doing that.
Yeah, I mean,
but I think in terms of expectations, I would say the loop was probably more work than we expected. A little bit, because you basically have to be on all the time. Like even when you're sleeping, you kind of have one eye open all the time, right?
There is definitely something when we did our loop that when you're at anchor or
at a wall,
you're on, because you're looking to see, did my anchor alarm go off? What's the weather going to do? What's the wind going to do? Is it going to change the swell? So you're always on.
And I remember sometimes, many times actually, when we're in the boat and you're very in tune with every sound in your boat.
Very much so.
So sometimes you hear a different sound and you both look at each other and you're like, what was that?
And you're very much attuned to those sounds, those noises. If you're at anchor, you hear the creak or you hear the something happen. If something changes, immediately, so the alarm bells go off and you're like, what was that? That was really interesting, because I would be up in the flybridge. One of the things that I noticed in boating is it's far noisier than you think it is. Some of you may have seen me with earplugs in as we were boating, but I would still recognize when Rachel dropped the boat hook, and I'd say, "What is that?" And she'd go, "It's just the boat hook."
Yeah. Or we did recommend having the headsets. I think we learned to communicate with each other. That was the boat hook, like right away, so that Malcolm would know.
Anything you hear, and certainly from my perspective, you become super attentive to the normal sounds that you expect to hear. And when something abnormal happens, regardless of what it is, you go on high alert. But it's even more attentive when you realize that this is your home.
And I think that's a safety aspect, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that didn't take away from the enjoyment, the fun. It was just part of the adventure, and it was just one more piece.
I think one last thing that we'd touch on is, I think it may be obvious now, why we sold our boat. We did buy our boat just to do the loop. We had always planned to sell Stay Cool after we were done, because we weren't planning to do it again. But I think it's pretty obvious that we sold the boat because we live in British Columbia and we weren't going to bring our boat all the way across the country.
No, it's a little too expensive. It's perhaps not the right boat for out here for what we want to do on our next adventure. And Stay Cool did a great job for us. She did all that we asked and more.
She's an excellent looping boat, and she is now owned by new owners and doing the loop again,
right,
which is exactly what she should be doing.
Yeah, that's what she's made for.
Yeah.
But out here, there's mountains, there's fjords, there's all sorts of things. It's all salt water. And we want to take advantage of some of those things. I'm glad she's with new owners. I think she'll do very well for them. I think we need to turn the page and move to a new chapter.
Absolutely.
And we're writing those next chapters now.
Yeah, we're working on that now. We're going to take you along to see some boats that we've been looking at. But we know there's some beautiful waterways out here. We may start by renting a boat and seeing, how we like boating out here as well.
Yeah, maybe a rowboat. Who knows?
We have kayaks. We could start with our kayaks.
Yeah. And I will. I've mentioned this, but I will be looking at doing some fishing out here, regardless of whether we have a brand new boat or we do kayaking or something. But I'll certainly be looking at fishing in the near future.
Yeah, we're going to share a lot of Vancouver Island with you and some of our experiences and travels out here. We might not go very far. We might even go in our backyard.
Yeah, we might. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I think, we've got this taste for adventure after doing the Great Loop. I think we pushed ourselves in some areas and really enjoyed doing it. So I think that's become a bit of a pattern for us. And while we still can, we'd love to have you come along with us.
You won't want to miss next week's episode when we share our top 10 tips for the Great Loop. Thanks very much for watching. We really appreciate your support. And stay tuned for lots more to come.